Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership, Part 2, our two-part series all about body language. This is number 2. You probably tuned in already for episode 32. What is your body language saying? We are going to dive further into that. It's a very interesting subject. I know Ron and I are both very passionate about it. We both coach on this. We do training on this. So it's really important that we take the time to pull it apart and teach you about it on this episode. So Ron, remind us of how important body language and signaling is not spoken about as often, how important it is.
It's really not. I do encourage our listeners, if you haven't listened to part 1, you have to do that. We laid a great foundation that we're not going to really go back into.
Right.
So in this part 2, we're going to talk about interpreting. And as a manager, one time I was meeting with someone and I had to provide some corrective feedback. And all of a sudden, everything was going fine. But when I started providing the feedback, the person looked all the way down to the right and was staring at the floor for the longest time. So I had to kind of regroup the way I was presenting this because I wanted to reel them back in because I saw they were ashamed, basically. And I read the body language. I got them back in some eye contact, and I continued providing that feedback. So the body language, the signaling, voice inflection, all those things come into play. And not only do we need to be schooled up in understanding other people's body language, we have to understand our body language. It's so important.
Right. It really is. So last week we talked about open body language, such as palms up, eye contact, maintaining eye contact for 30% of the conversation. These are all signals that you are open and interested in having a conversation. Now we're going to discuss closed body language. And so it's definitely different. So think about closed off. One is crossed ankles. So the feet are crossed. One ankle lies on top of the other. This can be done whether sitting or standing, or even with a feet on a table, right? That sends a bit of a different message. But basically what it means, a person crossing their ankles might feel uncomfortable and closed off, although there is an exception that I'll talk about below. But the tighter the ankles are locked, the more anxiety or stress the person may be experiencing. So when taking a step further into it, people may lock their feet around the legs of a chair. Have you ever seen that, Ron? I've definitely seen someone do that before.
Have. I think I've done it.
I don't think, I have short legs, so if my feet touch the ground, it's a great thing. So I don't recall wrapping my legs around chair legs, but that is seen in high stress situations. And so, we call this the ejection seat position because it's something many people would do if they were about to be launched out of their seat, right? You're going to brace. So the big exception to this rule is if you see the ankles crossed while the legs are outstretched on the floor, that's more of a relaxed posture with the legs taking up space. So that's pretty interesting. I think we've all sat on the floor and crossed our ankles, and I don't think that's because we were anxious. It's because we're chilling. We're watching Netflix. So do you want to talk about anything before I jump into the science of it?
No, I want to hear that science. Let's do it.
Okay. So in a study of 319 dental patients, ankle locking was a common body language cue done by most patients. I know I do that when I'm at the dentist. 68% of patients getting a checkup locked their ankles. 89% of patients locked their ankles as soon as they sat in their chair to get some dental work done. And a very large number here, 98% of them were ankle locked when they received an injection. So like the numbing, right? I don't think anyone enjoys that. So we can see why 98% were almost bracing for impact, right? Except they were laying down. So it's safe to say these patients were feeling defeated during this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I was getting a root canal and my legs started going to sleep. I realized I had my ankles crossed the whole time, and I was clenching my fists. We'll get to that. Along those same lines, Kristin, there's hand clasping. Now, let's say that a married couple is meeting with the principal and they're going to get some bad news. A lot of times they'll hold hands. You comfort one another. So hand holding is one of those languages that it's universal, just like a smile. So when someone is sitting by themselves, a lot of times, and I'm interlocking my fingers, if you're listening, they will interlock their fingers, even if it's on their lap, and you'll see them in even squeeze. If they're in a pressure situation, they're basically holding hands with themselves. And it gives them some comfort when that happens, especially it's like a self-hug if the fingers are interlocked. And they may have some other ways they do it, but usually the fingers are interlocked if they're doing the kind of the assureness and the self-love.
I just looked down. I'm doing something like that right now. I'm not feeling anxious or nervous, but I am doing that right now. So it's wild. I love this type of stuff, Ron, because we can really reflect on what we're doing and then maybe pick it apart a little bit and try to understand why we're doing what we're doing.
It's true.
Really wild.
And Kristin, a great technique for a leader is if someone they're uncomfortable and they've got their hands clasped like I talked about, you can make a little joke and just humor lightens the mood. If you're aware of body language, you can really use humor. Now, one of the things I did once is because I'd studied body language, I pinpointed someone's body language, not in an invasive way, just a humor way.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, I just studied body language. Are you giving yourself a hug or is that a barrier? Their arms were crossed.
Yeah.
And, I also do the joke, if their hands are missing, I say, wait a minute, I took training. It says, I can't trust you if both hands are missing when you cross your arms.
Gosh.
But I laugh when I say it. I say, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But you can use
That'll
it as
stick with them, though.
It's a powerful tool. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to talk about blading. And this is interesting. This is something, during research that came to surface. And
Is this like when they whip a blade out?
yeah, pretty much.
Angry?
I mean, if you've ever seen a fencing bout, these guys and gals on their feet, constantly moving back and forth in a game of basically who can stab the other gal first. It's basically chess, but with swords. And so by doing it that way, it basically, it makes their stance. You think of a fence, you're standing to the side. Which is exactly what people do when they're closing off. So when blading, the torso is turned away, maximizing reach, while maximizing damage to the person, the vulnerable frontal parts of the opponent. And really, since up to 90% of 12 people, right? So 90% of 12 people are right-handed. When you see blading, the left foot, which is also a non-dominant in most cases, is usually the one that steps forward, or the right foot may step backward. So what it means, dive into that a little bit more, Ron.
And Kristin, if you heard the term you're southpaw, if someone's southpaw, their left foot's going to be back and the right foot's forward.
Right.
Blading, you're basically just trying to make your target less. You're going from that open horizontal position. You turn sideways, and also you can block and move better if you're in a bladed stance. That's what it is. But if someone's doing that, they're usually uncomfortable for sure.
Right. That makes sense. I have to tell you, so when we were talking about this before, when somebody, let's talk about hugs, because I've been in a situation where it's usually men. They're going to go in for almost like a side hug, and it feels like that blading stance. What is that message that they're sending?
Yeah, that's a very cautious hug is what they're doing. They're not running this way. They're being very cautious. And I have had, now this is ancillary, but I have had some men tell me that they're more concerned than ever before of being perceived as overly flirtatious at work.
Yeah.
So if somebody does reach to hug them, they turn sideways, and that way your midsection isn't touching.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the idea. Or maybe they're shy or uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not open. It's more closed. It's almost like I have to do this, so I'm going to do it in the with the most distance that I can and the safest way that I can.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. I went to New York recently with a friend, and we were visiting one of my husband's NYPD coworkers. We went to lunch with him, and I keep making fun of him because there's this picture where we were taking a picture together. I had my arm around him, and he was giving himself a hug, like hugging. He had his hands on both his elbows.
Yeah.
And here's this big, tough guy that knocks down doors for a living, but he was hugging himself. And I was like, The only thing I could think of is that he was afraid that if my husband sees his picture and his arms around me, he's going to get ticked off at him, or his wife's going to get ticked off at him. It was the most awkward looking picture, and I just crack up every time I look at it. And I even called him out. I'm like, what are you afraid? You afraid you're going to get in trouble for giving me a hug back?
But that could very well, listen.
To your point.
Yeah,
what are you doing hugging her?
There's exterior forces at play that sometimes affect our body language for sure.
Exactly.
All right, I want to go into another one. And Kristin, we'll do this. Just, if you would, just put your hands in your front pockets for me.
Okay.
Now, I want to ask you a question. Are your thumbs visible, or did you hide your thumbs in your pocket?
My thumbs are the only thing visible.
Okay. Well, the consensus is that you're more confident, that you're displaying confidence. If your hand's in your pocket, but your thumbs are showing you're really just kind of relaxed, you're chilled. But sometimes if people are guarded or nervous, they will put their whole hand in their pocket. It's like a complete cover-up. And it's a little bit like we talked about when you cross your arms on the last episode, that if, at least one hand should be sticking out in general. And again, this is not an exact science. I mentioned in the last episode, you're looking for behavior changes. You're looking for body language changes, not so much the action itself. So again, I use the example, if I'm twirling a pen and then you ask me, did you murder that person? And the pen stops, that might be a sign that I'm lying. So that's kind of what we're talking about. Now, dogs will do that with their ears. They will hide their ears when they're in trouble. They do some of the same signs. And animals, by the way, exhibit body language all the time, that a lot of it's similar to humans. All right. What else, Kristin?
All right. So neck rubbing. This one's interesting and comes with a story. So when people rub their necks, they'll usually do it on the side or the back of the neck. And in more extreme cases, you're going to see this notch right here, basically in the clavicle area. So it's where your neck meets your clavicle. And if you're on YouTube, you can see this, or Rumble. But usually it's more visible in women. But basically what it means is people are going to rub their neck when they're feeling insecure or stressed. I know I rub the back of my neck when I'm stressed.
I do too.
Right? I feel like that's where the tension goes.
Right.
So for some people, this is their go-to method to relieve stress. So those who rub the neck regularly will also have a tendency to be more negative or critical than others. I disagree, but that's what science says. But I say it's self-soothing, so I'm going to go in that angle here. But the science is when the nerve on the side of the neck, called the vagus nerve, is massaged, basically it's a neurotransmitter that sends a signal to the heart, and it's causing the heart rate to go down. So it's pretty wild how we naturally are inclined to take care of ourselves in that way.
Yeah.
But here's a deadly example, as Ron likes to call it. But this is that story I mentioned here. So this does have a little bit of a graphic content to it. So just be aware of that as you listen. But in the formal interview of a Canadian-born Chinese Vietnamese woman named Jennifer Pan, that was a mouthful, by the way.
Yeah.
So she told detectives that her parents were murdered in her house by 3 unknown thugs. However, the interview officially turned into an interrogation when the detectives became suspicious. They noticed that her story didn't line up, and the nonverbal cues she displayed weren't normal for her situation. So it turns out that she actually had staged the murder herself, and she was faking the story the entire time. But this is where what we just discussed comes in. She was rubbing, what is that called? It's the clavicle notch.
The clavicle notch, yeah.
The clavicle notch.
Suprasternal notch.
Suprasternal notch. She was rubbing that. So, and that's in the front. So, that's the behavior that tipped them off that something, I'm sure with a couple other things, but that really tipped them off that something wasn't quite right here.
Yeah. No, that's
Very
interesting.
Yeah.
So the next one is physical retreat. And Kristin, everyone knows, like if you're about to run away, there's certain body positioning that you use. You usually put one foot back, almost like blading, and you're about to retreat. So what happens is sometimes when people are intimidated by someone they're talking with, they will do the retreat movements, even though they're not planning to run away, but they get in that position because they're nervous, and they're accustomed to running away, and they kind of want to run away, so they mimic that movement. So if you see someone, all of a sudden they step their leg back and maybe even glance over their shoulder, it's that fight or flight. They're nervous, and they're thinking they want to leave the scene if they can. So be aware of that, and also be aware, do not allow, if you're in a position where you should not be intimidated, don't allow someone to intimidate you. So don't take a retreat posture when you need to be in a forward-leaning, focused posture.
Right.
So it's very important that you do that. All right, Kristin, tell us about hunched shoulders. I know that's right down your purview for sure.
A big posture person. Hunched shoulders. I want to say I caught myself hunching my shoulders, and not in a good way. I was feeding horses, and my mom was videoing it, and I was really hunched, and I was like, wow, why was my posture so off? The only thing I can think of is I was trying to make the horse comfortable by not coming across as like a cause for worry, or so. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Ron? I was very hunched, and I don't know why I did that.
Kristin, you were trying to show, you were trying to not be aggressive, because good posture can be assertiveness at least. So you were trying to show, I'm not being assertive. I really want to be warm and welcoming here. But I will tell you, I have a family history of hunched back. I had an uncle who just passed away recently, and he was really slumped over. So I've got a chiropractor friend I talked to. I've mentioned him before, Dr. Tom. He's the one tried out for the American Gladiators. He and I talked a lot about this, and he had me doing exercises where I push back on the wall. But if he sees me and we're out, he'll say, stand up straight, buddy. I've given him permission to do that, because my tendency is, and of course I'm on a computer a lot, you're on your phone a lot, and it is affecting people's posture. So I'm really trying to make sure in my old age that I'm not bent over. I'm trying to really focus on that.
Yeah, because it can be, we're going to talk about coming at it from a confidence standpoint, but there can be physical attributes like we're discussing right now.
Kristin, one of the things, not to interrupt, but that I teach is on day one. It's a section in my book, Friend Today, Boss Tomorrow. The last thing you want to do is slump your shoulders when you get promoted. There has to be certain body language. You're not being arrogant, but you are in charge now. You are the leader now, and they're looking for a leader. So I tell people, skip the false humility and get your shoulders back. Be confident. Don't be intimidating, but be confident. And that's really what people want. That's what they're looking for.
Yes, people want to be led by the right leader. I think that's huge right there.
Here's one, Kristin. I think you have a story for this. People rub their eyes, and it's also soothing, but you're also kind of saying, I'd like a reset. There's an old funny thing that you're like, did this really happen? It's like you're starting over. You're doing a subconscious reset. So a lot of times people rub their eyes a long time. It's like psychologically they're hoping they open their eyes and they're in a whole different location and a whole different set of circumstances. So that's kind of what they're doing. There's special nerves in the eyes, and it's the vagus nerve, and it helps slow down heart rate, breathing rates when it's massaged. And we don't even know that. If you don't know the science, but there's certain things that we do that are just genetic, and people will rub their eyes, and it's actually slowing their heart rate, and it's comforting. But it's also that reset that they want. What's your story, Kristin?
Yeah, I was telling Ron. So when we were prepping for this, I was like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense. My son does this. It's like clockwork. Every time we're like, you need to go do your math. He hates math. We're working on it, but go do your math. Oh, he's rubbing his eyes. I'm like, you're not going to have eyelashes left at the speed you're rubbing them. So my husband will even be like, stop rubbing your eyes, because it's constant. But now when I was reading this, I'm like, oh my goodness, he's doing that. He heavily dislikes math, doesn't want to have to sit there and work through his math packets. So he's rubbing his eyes, trying to change his reality and soothe himself at the same time. I didn't know that until just when we researched this. So when I see him doing it the next time, because he will, I'm going to have a different approach, because now I understand the environment is stressing him out.
I'll tell you what I learned from this, Kristin. I knew rubbing the eyes was something that was soothing, and sometimes you're comforting yourself. But I'm big on breathing exercises, but this says to get, somewhere where you're by yourself and actually rub your eyes lightly while you're doing your breathing exercise, that it's very soothing. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I have to just say one more thing on that. Right between the eyes, my daughter had colic, and I didn't know any of the science behind it, but my instinct was like to rub right where the nose meets the forehead. And I would rub that, and she would stop crying.
Could that be the glabella?
It could be.
That's from the last episode. Glabella,
I'm like,
right,
I don't. Okay,
All
I'm
right,
like,
go
I don't
ahead.
remember that. Sorry. But yeah. So and it worked. It now I know it soothed her and it lowered that. So it even worked in those. It's funny how we're just inclined to do certain things.
We're
That help
genetically
us.
disposed to
amazing.
take care of yourself. My
Right.
little grandson the other day, he looks at my ex-wife and he goes like that. And she handed him something else. I said, how did you know what he wanted? She said, that's how he tells me. And it turns out that's actual sign language. Now the kid can talk now.
Okay.
But I don't know. Someone's taught him signing, or either that's just an inherent behavior. I don't know.
Really
but,
interesting.
But he did it.
All right, I'm going to talk about fidgeting with objects. So fidgeting involves you're going to play with nearby objects such as keys, coins, a pen, a ring, necklace. Even with the fidget spinner. I feel like a lot of kids have those. I'm not a proponent of those. I think they're completely distracting. And now that I teach every Tuesday, no one's attempted to bring a fidget spinner into class, but I would probably put an end to that because I think it's ridiculous. But anyhow, so fidgeting, really what it means is it's signaling boredom. So either bored of talking, bored of sitting down, even that someone may be bored of listening to you. Yes, ouch, but that's the truth. So people who fidget, they may be subconsciously desiring sensory reassurance. And this is similar to how babies hold on to their favorite toy. Other times it may mean that people are anxious or short on time, and in some cases even disappointed. So the science behind it, basically observations at railway stations and airports revealed that there are 10 times as many displacement activities in flying situations than in ordinary circumstances. So in other words, people fidget a lot when they're about to fly, and these behaviors include the following. You may be guilty of this: clenching your tickets, taking out passports, putting them away, rearranging hand baggage like your purse, your wallet, making sure your wallet's in place, dropping things, picking them up. So that's really interesting. Lots of fidgeting happening there. In contrast, only 8% of people boarding a train, so we're comparing a plane and a train here, showed signs of fidgeting compared to 80% of people at a check-in desk of an airline. So pretty wild. What are your thoughts on that, Ron?
That's interesting. No, I absolutely,
People are nervous to fly?
They're exhibiting their nervousness to fly,
Right.
which I find so interesting that, there's so very few plane crashes, but
Right.
it's the reality, but that's what they're doing.
Right, exactly. I know I've done that. You're afraid you're going to get sent home because you don't have your ID on you.
Yeah. No, I always say this. Everyone's telling a story constantly.
Right.
You just have to read the book. You have to pay attention.
Exactly.
And so another one, and I'm going to go quickly, touching your ears is a sign of uncomfortable. You either pull on them, scratch them, unless you got an itch, that means something's going on. And that's some signs that interrogators look for. Pulling on that ear is definitely a sign that you're nervous, you're uncomfortable, and something's up. And we mentioned the hands, but I didn't come back. But with your hands in your pocket, sometimes you can be saying that you're disinterested. You could be saying that you're bored or you're closed off. I don't really like this conversation. Now, again, the experts have had to realize when you get into science that there's these outliers. Some people just develop a habit and they're comfortable with their hands in their pocket. So you can't testify in court, this individual was lying because their hands were in their pocket. You're looking for signs, which gives you an opportunity for follow-up questions or to try to, make sure someone tells the same story twice. A lot of times people will change the story as they go. So that's what interrogators are looking for. But if you are seeing someone and they're pulling on their ear, they might be uncomfortable, they might be, dishonest. And if somebody keeps their hands in their pockets, it's possible they're closed off. They're letting you
Right.
know, and they don't even know they're letting you know that they're not really into this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to be, I thought I was pretty in tune, but there's so much more out
Oh,
there.
I'm learning every day on this stuff, and I teach
Yeah.
a little different than what we're doing. Kristen,
Yeah.
about the way we teach it, but it's still sending the same message.
Right, right.
I'm not trying to equip people to know body language when I left. I'm trying to teach them to take the skills they already know and use them.
Right.
Be
Right,
attentive.
exactly.
Because
Yeah.
I told you, we all have about 1,000, believe it or not, if you went through everything, most people know about 1,000 signals. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it really is.
And thousands of things in body language. But
Yeah.
it's just funny that you can meet a stranger, like I said, in an airport and tell a whole story with your facial expressions and never say a
Right.
word. It's so cool.
100%. It's
so cool.
amazing. It really is. It really is. So something else is body proximity. Basically, it's a term for how our body moves in the space that we're in. We're constantly looking at how someone is moving. Are they gesturing, leaning, moving toward or away from us? Body movements tell us a lot about preferences and feelings.
Yeah, next we have gestures, and we've talked a lot about, we call baton gestures or hand movement.
Mm-hmm.
We found this very interesting. There was research done on TED Talks, and they found that the most popular speakers always used their hands gestures more than others. So there is something powerful about hand gestures when you're
Yeah.
conveying information and you're communicating.
Absolutely. I always love when I do a speaking engagement and they have a wireless mic.
Yes,
So I don't have
agreed.
to hold the microphone. I'm
Agreed.
sure you've experienced that too, because you have to keep it. People that are prone to using their hands to talk, it's very difficult to be able to get your full personality out there when you're holding a mic to your mouth.
Yeah, in my request, they asked what I need. I put a lavalier mic if possible.
Is
So,
that I'm
yeah.
not as fancy.
So it's the one that fastens to your body.
Yeah, those are definitely nice. So you talked about hand gestures, ornaments. That's something. Your clothing, jewelry, sunglasses, hairstyles. They're all extensions of our body language. I talked on the last episode a little bit about your external poison, showing poison with. Are we wearing, are like the poisonous frogs? They're wearing really bright colors and drawing a lot of attention. That's something an ornament would be considered. How do we interact with our ornaments? Are we playing with our sunglasses, our jewelry, our clothes? Is someone fidgeting with their watch or their ring?
Yeah, and Chris and I have a story. I had an individual, this is when AIDS had just come on the scene, and unfortunately we didn't know a lot about it, and you didn't know if you could get it from touching someone to, and you were certainly
Right.
concerned that someone might spit on you. So I was a U.S. probation officer, and this guy, I received a confidential file that he had AIDS, and he came into my office, and he was wearing sunglasses. And of course, we're looking for drug use. We always want to look
Yeah.
at people's eyes. So this was my first meeting with him, and I asked him to remove the glasses, and he responded immediately and said, there's not a condition of supervision that I remove glasses. So he's, he does what disgruntled employees do. Where's the policy?
Yeah.
So I basically told him again, I said, I want to be able to see your eyes and assess you, and I can't do that with the sunglasses on.
Right.
Please remove your sunglasses. Anyway, this escalated. He jumps up. And I got to tell you, Kristen, I was very nervous. Again, we were really ignorant on the AIDS pandemic
Right.
or epidemic, and my heart was pounding. So when he stood up, I stood up, and I'll never forget this. He was a member of the Black Panthers. It was a very violent gang back, then.
Right.
And he was a pretty big guy. When he stood up, I stood up. So here we are. My desk is between us, but we're squared off. And I basically said, leave my office. Now, I had a duress button that I could have pushed, but it took forever. It was older court security officers. Sometimes the marshals would come.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just kept pointing, you need to leave, you need to leave. So he left, and then I got a warrant from the judge, and we picked him up. But at that time, I felt that was the best way to de-escalate, get him out of the building, and then we'll pick him up later, because I was so worried about that. But it all started because he had that barrier of the sunglasses.
Yeah, right. And that happened in the bank all the time. People would come in with their sunglasses to withdraw money or do it. It's like, come on, you got to take those off. But there wasn't a law, right?
Right.
So, yeah. So they definitely like to pull that card. All right, you're going to share with us interest.
Yeah, interest. And we've talked about this, but what I want to remind our listeners is just show interest. Use your open body language instead of closed. Everything from nodding your head, the eyebrow flash we talked about, that shows interest. A smile shows interest. An open stance shows interest. So just be aware of those cues that you can use that lets people know, I want a connection with you. I'm listening to you. I understand what you're saying, and I want to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. I can go over pacifying here. So pacifying behaviors consist of a wide range of self-soothing. I like to find the derivative, right? The pacifier, right? So you think about that. That's a self-soother for babies. And so basically, this is what adults use to calm down after experiencing something unpleasant. So it can be seen with fidgeting, bouncing feet, arm rubbing. We talked about how you can rub your neck as well. So basically, any repetitive behavior is likely pacifying.
Kristin, I worked with someone who, again, this is a little graphic. She was sexually assaulted, and after the assault, she began sucking her thumb. Just like she did as a child, and had to work through that. Sucked her thumb for a long time.
Wow.
A lot of times they say that, we talked about psychopaths and sociopaths. They believe that sociopaths, some part of the brain stops operating. And in her case, it reverted back to being a baby.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wild.
All right. Emblems are basically, we use them all the time now. Emblems would fall in the line of their symbolic cues like emojis. And I don't know if you do this, Kristin, but I really wonder which emoji to use. And if you use the wrong one, will it be understood?
Yeah.
But there are over 800 emblems just from OK and thumbs up. And you and I have talked about that. But that is sending a signal. That's nonverbal. It's an emoji, or it's a meme, or it's something else. So
exactly.
That's something we have to navigate that is way more prevalent now than it was before. From, social media, there's all kinds of things. I'm sure you have, Kristin, but people might look at a picture or a meme that you did, they misunderstand it. I mentioned that I did that funny, I don't know if you saw it, Kristin, but I'm walking in the upscale restaurant, and
I like that one.
The VIP, and I do this to the camera because he was saying, this is only for VIPs, not you.
You did
and
the
of course,
cut symbol.
And of course, I knew the guy well and all that.
Yeah.
But someone got really offended about that. They were taken up for me, but they were highly offended, and I had to tell them, hey, we were joking. That was just for fun. But anyway, that's the way it is. People sometimes perceive things differently.
They do. So I did the A-OK symbol, right? So, or you have the three fingers up, and I thought it was pretty innocent. I did that in a video, and somebody said I was flashing a Satan symbol.
Yeah.
So, and that's if your hand was going, I have since learned that's if your hand is facing the other way. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even do A-OK anymore without someone thinking I'm a Satanist. It's just gone a little too far.
It has gone a little too far.
Oh.
So, Kristin, we've gone through 2 episodes on body language, signaling, voice inflection, open, closed movements, all these things. What's your thoughts? Has this sparked your interest even more in this topic?
Absolutely. I'm definitely a peeping Tom of the mind. I know you are as well. And so it's brought it to where it's next level, because I'm watching so much more. And then at the same time, able to understand more. I can understand, even from this episode, how to handle my son when he starts rubbing his eyes when it's time to do math. So it's helping me also, and in turn helping my family.
Well, I'm a little more sophisticated than you. I'm a voyeur of the mind.
A voyeur. Oh, wow. It has a negative connotation for sure.
No, this it's so funny that I actually teach this. I'm certified, but I learn every time. There was stuff in this that I learned that I did not know. And even the rubbing your eyes and breathing, I'm going to try that, because I find myself when I'm tired or stressed, I want to rub my eyes. And I was thinking they're just itchy, but there's more to it than that. I'm actually slowing my heartbeat. So I think this is intriguing. I would like to say for our listeners to start to just watch people's body language, and they're telling you a story, and I guarantee you're going to know a lot of the chapters of that book if you pay attention. It will also enhance every part. If you're an entrepreneur, it's going to enhance your world. If you're managing people, it's going to enhance your ability to effectively not only read what they're trying to say, but also with your own body language. You can be warm and
Right.
welcoming, or you can be assertive if you need to.
Right.
It helps you not be, you can overcome insecurities and things through your body language. So it's
Right.
so important. Chris and I have enjoyed these episodes so much.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
want to remind people, don't forget to get your planner. The
Yes.
Forward High Performance Planner is on Amazon. And also, please tell people about this podcast. We are growing. And I know sometimes you get people who are really excited in the beginning and then they back up. But we're working hard to get really good content like the past
Right.
2 episodes, things that are just interesting but also can help you. And our goal is for you to be successful, whatever that looks like to you, whether
Right.
you're a parent or whether you're on the job, but we want you to be successful, right, Kristin?
Absolutely. Yeah. In every realm of life, we want you to be successful.
Yeah, we sure do. All right, everybody, be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.